Welcome, Frank Visser. You're a psychologist of culture and religion. You're an author of the book Thought as Passion, about the philosophy of Ken Wilber. And you're also the founder of the Integral World website, which publishes articles, many of which reflect critically on integral philosophy in general and Ken Wilber in particular. And so, Frank, given that you're a well-known critic of integral theory, I was wondering, could you please give a definition of what a critic means to you, and perhaps say something about what you see as the function of criticism within a discipline or within a community?
That's a meaty subject for starters. Yeah, critical is, of course, a bit a loaded term. I think science and philosophy live by criticism. That's the way of proceeding and making results. So it's, for me, a kind of neutral term. Of course, criticism can drift off in nitpicking and attacking and dismissing, but we're not talking about that extreme versions. So it's an integral integral part of the intellectual endeavor. And I've had, of course, a long history with integral in the field, about 40 years, starting in '82. And I was thinking today that, like, the first 20 years, I was totally floored by Wilber's books. And they came out every year, and I absorbed them and thought about them, reflected on them, and so on. And then there was a kind of turning point around 2005. We had the Wyatt Earp episode. And for me, a new phase started where I was no longer in the promotion mode, but in the validation mode, so to speak. Because, yeah, that's how you proceed, in my opinion. We can see it as a kind of polarity, right? So you have a huge body of knowledge, and what do you do with it? Well, you promote it, you apply it, but then something is missing. You need to critically engage it, compare it to alternatives, see how sturdy it is, and that's the role I've been playing for 20 years. And it attracted like 200 authors. I had no clue that this would happen. It started the website with 5 pages, and now it is 2,000 pages. And it's one essay can be 30 pages long, so you can do the math. And it's a kind of spontaneous grassroots thing that has grown. It has a life of its own. I'm the employee of that thing, the sole employee. It's a kind of, yeah, a huge hobby, and it is also a bit at the end of its life cycle, I must confess. When COVID came, I shifted my attention to Corona and the conspiracies around Corona. I wrote 40 chapters on that. Then we got the Ukraine war. And again, I had lively debates with other authors on the website. I wrote about a dozen essays, and now we have the Middle East. So again, that has completely captured my attention. On top of that, I have the AI revolution, of course, and I've started to use that ChatGPT, and that again has generated 80 essays by now. So yeah, I don't know where that ends, but and I'm also always circling around integral, if possible. If not, then I just follow where it leads. But I have shifted my attention more and more to world affairs and less to personal growth and mysticism. Like 40 years ago, I came from India. I studied psychology of religion. I was into the I domain, and I've shifted more and more to science and to society.
Would you say that your cosmology has also changed over the years?
Probably it did, because before I discovered Wilbur, I was, of course, reading through the marketplace, like whatever you had, Theosophy, Gurdjieff, whatever there was, and I had some kind of vague mystical worldview that, okay, something was behind everything that is governing it, and that for a long time that was meaningful to me. For about 10 years, I was publisher of the Theosophical Society in the Netherlands, and they have a strict spiritual evolution doctrine, like from the divine it comes down, and then in the material world it reverses its course and it goes up again, it returns, and evolution is a kind of upward return to its source. And that is very similar to Wilbur. But yeah, when I was in this mid-period of mid-2000, we had the Darwin year, 2008. And I realized I almost knew nothing about evolution. It was just spiritual ideology. I had fed myself. And just out of curiosity, I started reading Darwin, of course, Dawkins. And it was a whole new world that opened itself. And I realized that having spent so much time with the Wilbur lens, had become a kind of mental prison for me. So I had to break out of that. And that explains perhaps my somewhat antagonistic approach to integral, although I have remained related all those years. I mean, many people would have just left, if you know what I mean. They move on. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but my world changed. Yeah. And you could say it became reductionistic. Yeah, true. But more interesting, in fact, for me.
Okay. I recently hosted a community conversation, so that was the name of it, and it was just with people from Integral Life and Integrally Adjacent. And I wanted to speak about the polarity of inclusion and exclusion. And you and I, we've spoken previously about this also, is sort of who belongs to the integral community. And many of the people on the call, they describe themselves as being of basically having one foot in the integral community and one foot outside of the integral community, and feeling as both an insider and an outsider. And for me, that's also true. And I can imagine for you, that's also a reality.
Yeah, well, yeah, I would lie if I said I dropped out of that sphere, because after 40 years, it's still my daily interest and activity. So, but it has perhaps become less important or less urgent for me. Of course, yeah, time goes by and everything has its life cycle. Wilbur has his life cycle as a writer, and it's perhaps now more time to look back and take stock and to see what will stand the test of time, and what needs to be reformed or repaired or whatever.
So if you say that you're still daily more or less involved with, let's say, integral philosophy or integral theory, what's going on in your mind then? What are you working on, so to speak, or are you still using integral concepts, or how are you still related to the integral project?
It's hard to tell because, for example, we have today Hamas and the Middle East and terrorism and all the discussions. Yeah, the initial impulse is, of course, to label it with all the colors you have of the spiral dynamics model, and then what? The answer is then everybody has to grow up. But it seems to me a little bit futile. It is maybe true, but it is like ineffective because there is so much going on in the world that is outside the scope of that model, like the power structures in the world, the economy, military complex, what's going on here. And so the relevance of integral concept has become less for me. although it is appealing and it is attractive to do a quick light-colored diagnostics and the clashing of values and the culture wars. But then what? I'm always thinking about the next step. And yeah, of course, the true integralist will say, well, we have to evolve, and that is a bit of a mystery how evolution works or development works. And we can only hope for the best and perhaps, yeah, push people a little bit. That's a little bit a luxurious situation, that we have a peaceful country and we can follow courses and trainings, and we do everything to flower. But the world outside is different. And yeah, that has more my attention at the moment. Also, because some authors on the integral world have pointed me out that, yeah, the political dimension, the geopolitics, I knew nothing about this. I had to study that as well.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. At the same time, from my perspective, because I feel both an insider and an outsider in relation to the integral community, but I personally see integral philosophy as a useful tool, and indeed, as you describe, sort of quick analyses of very complicated world situations, and then to see how can we interpret it in a sort of a holistic way. Perhaps it's because I relate to the model as a tool to sort of gain clarity about reality that I'm not so conflicted about the model. But where do you feel that you have difficulty with the model itself? So say, for instance, the quadrants, the intelligences, the levels, the types, and the states. If you were to create a version of your own of those elements, what would remain? Would anything remain?
Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. So I believe it was in 2013, there was an integral theory conference, and there were two luminaries invited, Roy Bhaskar and Edgar Morin. And the idea was to position them in the I, we, it, the tree triad, and to say Wilbur is strong in his I domain, and Bhaskar in society, and Edgar Morin in science. I can't tell if that is correct because I have not read anything of the other two philosophers. But I picked up the idea that, and Wilbur could also, of course, say, yeah, but I invented the quadrants. Huh? So it's my scheme that helps you to position the other people. That was a nice comment. But I think it's true that the strongest and truest elements are in the I domain. So personal growth, psychology, spirituality, mystical stages. I mean, that's unparalleled as far as I can tell. And at the same time, it's less relevant for me. When I was younger, it was absolutely fascinating. Roberto Assagioli of the psychosynthesis school, he called that alpinism, spiritual alpinism. So you can climb higher and higher and higher, and it's super conscious and so on. I was immensely attracted by those ideas and experiences. But I think still that is the strongest part of integral. Then you get the we, society. It's a little bit the good, the bad, and the ugly. So that is still plausible, like spiral dynamics. I think initially it's still plausible, but it gets stuck for my feeling. Of course, you can go deeper into details, and spiral dynamics is much more complex than you usually hear. But in the end, it's still a matter of like, okay, we have clashing values, and we have, that's what it is. And yeah, it's descriptive. It's not like pointing a way out or something. So I would say it's appealing, but it needs confirmation, or it needs at least a comparison with other theories about society and so on. And then you have the it domain, science. I think that's the weakest part of integral. Now you can of course say, who cares? Because most integral students are not in it for the science. They are in it for the personal growth and exploration and discovery and so on. Yeah, I'm totally fine with that. But Wilber's claim is that he has a theory of everything. And he also comments on science. He even claims support from scientists. And that's where I come in, because I've chosen that relatively weakest field to see if that holds true. And I've come to totally different conclusions. I'm totally okay with people who say, well, who cares about entropy and evolution and whatever. But if you cast your net wider, which Integral wants, he wants to cover all the bases, then you end up asking yourself, is there spirit behind everything or not? These are the options. And I would currently say no.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because you and I, we spoke before, of course, and I think based on our conversation, but correct me if I'm wrong, that you then asked ChatGPT to generate a fictional dialogue between a critic of integral theory and a proponent of integral theory, which was then in your article represented by Ken Wilber. And what I found really interesting is that when summarizing the difference between those two viewpoints, that ChatGPT used the following text, and I'll quote. So the critic says, after sort of going through basically what you were just saying, so is spirit behind everything, or is it more a material process based on evolution of gravity and entropy? So the critic then concludes basically with, I guess our differences boil down to what we prioritize: empirical rigor and domain-specific explanations on the one hand, or holistic narratives and metaphysical integrations. And then the critic says, I respect the integrative ambition of integral theory, even if I remain skeptical of its explanatory claims. And then the proponent of integral theory says, and I appreciate the critical engagement. It's through such dialogues that we refine and deepen our understanding. So for me, that was a really nice sort of summary.
Yeah, can you believe it, that this bot has reached a level of mediation that human beings have not been able to do in 20 years.
Well,
and it did it in a split second.
I agree, but I think what's happening here is a sort of a meta-analysis of the positions and then seeing them as a polarity, basically. And
yes.
I wanted to ask you whether you also feel that this analysis accurately describes the primary difference between perspectives of critics of integral philosophy and proponents of integral philosophy.
It depends a little bit of what you mean with holistic. So it's true that you have a polarity between detailed studies and more generalizations, and you need both, absolutely. And both can go to extremes, so you can totally disappear in detail work and lose sight of the overview. And you can also freely generalize, fact-free and without any substance. So the thing with all polarities is that you stay close together, but you preserve the polarity and respect each other. This reminds me, by the way, of a model in the Netherlands. It's very popular. It's called the core quadrant model, and it says you have two polarities and you have two caricatures of it. And it's basically the same. So every quality has an extreme version, but if you reduce this to the original qualities, then you can appreciate your challenge, the opposing quality. I think that's a perfect mediation model.
I actually mentioned because it was Daniel Hoffman, a Dutch consultant, who developed that model. And I mentioned that in the Integral Flourishing course that I created. And later, I also found out that there's a polarity management model developed by Barry Johnson. And it's very much the same, but it's actually a more simple form of the core quadrants that Hoffman describes. And it's basically the polarity is, indeed, you have a spectrum of two things, indeed, which seem to be in opposition to each other. And you look at the ways in which you can get the positive of both without falling into the negative poles of both. And Corey DeVos of Integral Life, he's been creating a large number of these polarity maps, and we use.
Yeah, I noticed. Yeah, that's a new development, right? At Integral Life.
Yeah, certainly. Because Bina Sharma, she did a course which you can follow on Integral Life about polarity management. It was a really good course as well. So.
Yeah, I agree. Still, you could say, bringing it back to the spirit or not discussion, that is there spirit or not is at the level of generalizations. So you could still opt for differences. The objection I have against the idea of spirit is that it begs the question. So if you say, why do things evolve? That's because spirit is behind it. That explains nothing. It's like trees grow because they want to see the light. It's like, no, this is not how it works. It is that the trees that turn out to be higher catch more light and therefore are preserved. So that is exactly the difference between a romantic spiritual philosophy and a more mundane, reductionistic, if you will, analysis. And I'm more triggered by the second version at the moment. It explains something. And the other option, in my understanding, is circular. If there is a spirit up behind evolution, what is the spirit doing on the moon or on Pluto? Why is it not evolving there? Does it need special conditions? Why? And if so, perhaps the conditions are most important. And then you are in the scientific field again that looks for conditions under which life can evolve. So it is a kind of pseudo explanation.
You spoke about Darwin just now, indeed, and you and I were speaking earlier via email about the distinction between so-called lumpers and splitters, and this does seem to be appropriate for this discussion also, because the lumpers are then defined as people who prefer to organize reality by combining categories, sometimes at the expense of details. And splitters are people who prefer to organize reality by distinguishing categories, and sometimes at the expense of synthesis. And interestingly, what I didn't know is that the physicist Freeman Dyson, he correlates lumpers with idealists, so people who hold consciousness as fundamental to reality, and splitters he correlated with materialists who hold physical matter as fundamental to reality. So
to the atoms, yeah.
Exactly, but so you can break stuff down into atoms, or everything emerges out of spirit, so to speak. I mean, I still see then this as being the same polarity, basically, of if you break it down into materialism and idealism, or you break it down into lumping and splitting, or whichever way you sort of approach it, it seems that it's an indestructible polarity which needs to be seen as a whole, and not one whole to be acknowledged and the other sort of disavowed. So what do you see as the future of integral theory evolving forward?
Yeah, it was let down as a meta theory. And even asking, is it a good meta theory, is a very difficult question, because I asked that in one of the panels in an integral theory conference, I believe 2010, to Stephen Wallace. He is into meta theory, and he wrote a small essay for Integral World, and he said, well, it totally depends on what you mean by good and what you mean by meta theory. And it's almost impossible to answer. Is a meta theory supported by facts? Can it be refuted by facts? I don't know. Or is it just an umbrella for a whole lot of facts? I don't know. It's an interconnection I don't understand. So if that was the claim of Wilber's philosophy, to give a model that is like a meta theory for a whole lot of other theories and models, it will survive if it's found useful by scientists and philosophers and people like you and me. But most probably it will die out as any philosophical system, especially when it is so person dependent and not really sprouting any different schools, or it's not a Freud and Jung situation. It's not like clashes between, as far as I can tell, inside the intercommunity that has brought new directions, or could be. I'm not totally privy to that.
I understand what you're saying. And earlier you said that saying that spirit is the ground of everything that exists doesn't explain anything. But I would say that at an experiential level, for many people, it explains their experiences of wholeness that they've had throughout their lives, and that seeing a model which has room within it for those experiences to be real, so to speak, at least experientially, is very valuable. So
You mean mystical experiences, unity, and so on?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. But then again, these could have alternative explanations. So it could be chemicals in your brain, and it could be cosmic spirit speaking to you. That's not something that is decided in any way. And to be on the more economical side, I would opt for the chemicals for now, because I think it's an overreach to introduce cosmic dimensions and spirit and supermind and whatever to explain our worldly affairs on this tiny planet. It's not plausible to me.
The thing that I found interesting about your response is the certainty with which you are able to say yes or no in a particular direction, because from a strictly scientific perspective, you could say there's a non-zero chance that spirit is behind everything. So to be adamant in the rejection of that possibility, to me, seems somewhat unwarranted.
It's probably more a matter of it doesn't appeal to me anymore. Like, it's, for example, atheists don't believe anything. They just don't believe in a God behind it. So it's a kind of negative. It's not like that's all what it is. So I'm more skeptical. I've grown more skeptical about it, just because actually I've done a detour in the creationist literature, which is almost a kind of pornography for me. Like, it's exciting that people like young Earth creationists and old Earth creationists, they really are adamant that even supported by scientific facts, that there has been a flood and there is, creation in 7 days and so on. Now, that's totally a side issue, but it's interesting that you can see Wilbur as a kind of sophisticated creationist, which says two things: that he is not like the crude Bible Belt creationist, but he doesn't escape the problems that they have, that he introduces something for which there is almost no evidence, and it also has no explanatory value, as I'm concerned. So he's in the same boat, and he could therefore, in his latest book, Religion of Tomorrow, he can quote a creationist who is on his side,
Yeah, I must say I've read parts of The Religion of Tomorrow, so I still have to read the entire book. But
I did a review of that book of about over 100 pages.
Okay.
It's in 7 parts, and it's absolutely fun to read. And I don't understand people who say, "Oh, it's just the same old story again." It's not the case. But again, it gives me so much to argue with and disagree with.
Mm-hmm.
That keeps me going.
So that's interesting for within the context of another polarity, because Steve McIntosh, whom you also know, and whom I recently also interviewed, he speaks a lot about the gratitude and grievance polarity. So the gratitude is basically preserving what's right and what's good, and the grievance side of the polarity is fixing what's wrong. So from your perspective, what are you grateful for about integral theory, and perhaps even in the way that you're able to sharpen your own wits against the theories of Ken Wilber, for instance? Where are your gratitudes and your primary grievances?
Well, the gratitude covers the first 20 years of my engagement. So it is like the eye openers and the wider views that he offered, and the stunning capacity to deal with topics that other scientists have dealt with, but in a highly original way, in which he integrated stuff and like therapy and pathology and the stages and so on. I've never seen that anywhere. I think that stands on its own. In terms of fixing, I've also explored big history, which is a school of, you could say integral thinking, which is heavily leaning towards the outside of things. But perhaps for precisely that reason, it's a fresh look. It's perhaps complementary, even a polarity, towards integral theory, which is more inward looking or subjective. And I'm looking there for fixes. And then you get into the entropy evolution discussion, which is totally complicated until it goes beyond my head as well. But I have the feeling that they are closer to the facts.
Regarding scientists who have, let's say, a solid scientific reputation in a particular field, and who nonetheless view reality as ensouled, or as indeed the emergence of spirit, for instance, like Erwin Laszlo, who proposes, of course, a sort of a cyclical universe, which each new universe is informed by the previous universe, etc. What's your perspective on those sorts of views of reality?
I believe I've read 2 books by Laszlo. I'm not too much triggered by it, and especially when you start about the Akashic field and so on, I get traumatic remembrances of the esoteric field I was in long time ago, and the Akasha and the chronicles and the cosmic memory and so on. I'm no longer triggered by that. But actually I'm interested in a kind of overview of that field. So who is in this field at all? And how close or distant are authors towards each other? And where does Kaufman and all these highly intellectual mavericks fit in, and self-organization and so on? You can spend all day just studying all that stuff and still not knowing what it is about, but it is still fascinating for me. And fixing things. I would have hoped that, for example, Wilber had written a book about terrorism decades ago. I believe it came after Boomeritis, a trilogy on terrorism, and it has never been published. So I'm always a bit disappointed by, okay, you have this massive model claimed to have relevance in all the fields of life, and the world is on fire. We have the Iraq war, now this is the Middle East, we have the Ukraine war. Where is the integral response to that, or the analysis that goes beyond the color coding? It is really, perhaps we should even advise to drop all that jargon. For example, today I listed that the essay that was published by Integral Life about the social revolutions, that essay, it's a 20-year-old essay by Wilber. I read it again and I was struck by the heavy use of memes and colors and quadrants and gradients, and it's a totally insights language. It's jargon. It will not convince anybody outside the circle of Integral. And that's a pity, because the potential is so much more, I think, of these ideas. But I don't know how to translate that. I don't have the capacity to do that, but somehow there should be an outreach, especially now that we have two wars at the same time. I mean, I would say all units, all units. Who can do that?
Well, that's a good question. And what would your own perspective be on the, let's say, the Israel-Hamas conflict at the moment? How would you approach that from your own perspective, perhaps including some integral elements and perhaps including elements of other models or other theories? How would you view the situation?
I've really struggled with that for the past weeks, and of course asked ChatGPT to help me a lot. And you can go from the one extreme that says something that has a problem that has existed for 75 years is obviously unsolvable, or you say the other extreme, it's really simple. People should just get along with each other. No. And everything is in the middle of that. But again, it requires an expertise, of course, in history and psychology, and I don't know if I can say anything meaningful here. I do say that my feeling has always been that the Palestinians are the victims here, because they have been put in refugee camps by the millions and generations that have grown up there, and their land has been taken, their olive trees orchards have been burned, and the roads have been built that they cannot even cross. I mean, that reaches a boiling point. There comes a time that you have an intifada and then a second intifada, and then you have extreme offshoots like Hamas, and they do awful things. And this is of course the discussion in all the newspapers. Who condemns what and who is more violent? And that's a hopeless discussion. But I can understand that if you have no sight of any real future and no separate state, not in a two-state and not in a one-state solution, you're really stuck. And then you do awful things. I have no solution to that, but I do think that the US is of course very close to Israel, and that increases the problem, that continues the problem. But they should be able to use their influence to tell Israel to solve this problem. I mean, you cannot just grab land and push people away, and I mean, what ethics is that? But yeah, I say that from a safe country and a safe home, and I have not gone through all the ordeals of these peoples, but it seems to me obvious that something has to give. And at the moment you have extremists in the Israeli government, and you have extremists in the Hamas, and they each want to obliterate the other. So yeah, this is a polarity thing that has run out of hand completely.
So what would you say that about a perspective of, let's say, everything as emerging from spirit? Because I would say one of the advantages of such a perspective could be that you then see all of reality as a manifestation of the same source, and so you feel that harming other people is basically the same as harming yourself from a larger perspective. So would you say that a unity perspective from that, in that sense, could contribute to a route to solution?
I keep having the feeling that if spirit is behind everything, it falls out of the equation, because then the Jewish spirit is fighting the Arabian spirit, and it doesn't add any light on the problem. Of course, people damage themselves by getting more violent and more extreme and radicalization and so on. You get traumas that last for generations, and yeah. But who are we to tell them that this is the result of policies by superpowers and yeah, they are the ball is in their ballpark, I would say. But at the moment, they're just sending warships and yeah, doesn't look promising to me at all.
You earlier hinted at the fact that from an integral perspective, the response would basically be, a generalized response would be, the solution to such a problem is development of all of the parties involved, and indeed making sure that the life conditions are conducive to the emergence of particular forms of growth. Is that something you would agree with, or do you see that that is too limited an approach?
Well, no, it's more than enough. Even if people would become more reasonable on both sides, then that would be a great step in the right direction. I mean, at the end of Up From Eden, Wilber says something like, that would be the real new age if people started to become rational. So forget about integral and spiritual and mystical. It's just, we should not be tribal and mythical and in groupthink and you know, we should drop that and be more rational, humanistic, think global. That's enough. But of course, again, how do you get people there? I mean, Don Beck tried a lot of things in Palestine, and his colleagues. Yeah, hats off to that. But I don't know if it lasted or what they trained or what they tried to do, but it's, yeah. In that sense, it would be helpful if there was a spirit that said, come on, guys, grow up. But what's he waiting for?
Well, I think the way that I was using spirit, it would not be in the way that you're now hinting at it, in the sense of sort of a deity or something that is apart from reality. So it would be basically the ground of everything, and everything would be infused with it. So basically,
yeah. Last week on Twitter, I suggested that Allah and Jehovah should figure this out, perhaps with the help of Shiva, and when needed, Zeus could help.
What was the response?
Nothing.
Oh.
But of course, if these people are so religious and theistic, and they want to have a Jewish or an Islamic theocracy, what's their God thinking of all this? On the other hand, in the United States, Christian, perhaps Jews as well, they love this escalation in the Middle East. They see it as a sign of the times that Jesus is coming back and so on. It's apocalypse. They just want to push it further, and that's the real enemy we have: the mythic believers, and they just are not reasonable.
Well, speaking about generative dialogue and engaging in a way that produces constructive outcomes. In the article I mentioned previously that you wrote together with GPT, at the bottom of your article, there are, of course, comments where people can share their views. And one of the people who'd read the article plotted the advice that GPT had given about how to have generative dialogues across the quadrants. And I created a sort of an edited version of this as a slide. So I'll share it with you because I'm curious about your perspective, whether you feel that this is perhaps a good way to go about creating generative and constructive dialogues, whether you feel that some things are missing or not, or perhaps things should be removed. So you see in the upper left corner, indeed, the I quadrant, deep listening, self-reflection, and humility were the things that ChatGPT advised, among others. In the upper right, so action, speaking from the highest self, that I sort of translated that, so you might want to reformulate that. Act politely.
Behave yourself, yeah.
Yeah, I think behave yourself is perhaps act politely. What I mean by speak from your highest self is basically to be aware of all of the options you have to respond, and then to choose the option that is the most generative or the most constructive. And then indeed using I statements, and in the lower left, relating to others, of course, with respect, avoiding devaluing the views of others, and focus on mutual understanding. And in the lower right, avoid interrupting people, ask clarifying questions, honor valid points. So even if you don't agree with the entire view of someone, typically you can agree on points that people make.
Yeah, sure. The quadrants seem a bit forced, but the points are valid, of course.
What would you add to this if you had to add any more advice?
Develop expertise or invite expertise, or depending on the topic at hand, of course. But it all comes down to how do we evaluate Wilber's statements of everything under the sun? And are we able to do that at all? Or who can do that? Who can we find with enough expertise in the various fields to comment on that, if they are interested at all? That is a bit of a dilemma, I think, or you could call it a tragedy, that if you create a school, then in that school everybody agrees on the language and the quadrants and all that jazz. And outside of the school, people are just puzzled. What are you talking about? I recall when I was in the first conference, 95, it was not a conference. Yeah, I was in CIAS, a Wilber conference. I was in a cafe with 3 other people I met there, and we were all attending that conference. And we were totally into the integral discussions, and it was a heated, and we shouted, and we drank, and it was a German bar or something in San Francisco, and there was an elder couple on the table next to us, and they left, and when they left, they passed by our table, and he said, "We had no clue what you were talking about, but it was wonderful. If you are inside it, it's all wonderful. If you're outside it, you think, what are they talking about?"
Yes, but I would say that's also the same for any discipline. So, for instance, at the moment, I'm reading Roger Penrose's book on Road to Reality. So basically all of the mathematics that underlies relativity theory and quantum mechanics. And I estimate that I understand.
What's his name?
Roger Penrose. So and so I estimate that I understand about at maximum 10% of what he's saying because of the jargon and the mathematical equations, etc. So I think that's just that's part of being a discipline with terminology that is so specified because it describes aspects of reality that are outside the everyday experience of most people. So I mean I think you make a good point that if if the project is to make integral more popular, then not communicating in jargon, so communicating clearly, is a much better strategy than communicating with too much terminology. And at the same time, I do find that people appreciate the way that this terminology allows us to speak very quickly about very complex things in great depth.
It's true. And I mean, even a plumber has language you wouldn't understand.
True.
So that's no problem. Every specialism has its terminology, but there was a time that when I did the Wilbur meetups here in Amsterdam for about 10 years, it was just fun to have dinner with each other and then color code everything that was of interest to us. It kind of lingua franca until we totally got fed up with it, because as I said, it's initially plausible and you can quickly do it, and then what? If you would consider writing a letter to the New York Times or whatever newspaper, you should strip all that jargon, of course. And that's a challenge.
I think that Steve McIntosh does quite a good job of it. He still introduces some terminology, but in a recent course that he created about developmental politics.
Yeah, he uses neutral terms.
Which other models of reality do you see that can do the same things as integral theory in scope and breadth, but are better and more optimal from your perspective?
I don't think they exist. The next best thing is to how to say that, to cherish the integral model and to culture it and to fix what needs to be fixed and to shake that tree and to see what sticks and what falls on the ground and so on. So a challenge or a critical engagement is always healthy and even necessary, I think, for any philosophical system. Otherwise, you turn into a school or even a cult. But I wouldn't use that word anymore. But 20 years ago, I would have used that word for integral. And that's all a matter of closing. Are you closing into your in-group, or are you keeping the windows open and even invite critics and those who at least take the trouble to study your work and then have different opinions? Those who don't care, of course, are different. That's not your audience. It's unsurpassed as a model, as an attempt, but it's a proposal and nothing more, and it's something to be evaluated, I think.
I understand that perspective, and I also agree with you that criticism can help strengthen and improve models, and we've been doing so since the dawn of time, of course. And at the same time, for me, in using the integral model, if something better comes along which is more accurate, so to speak, I'll eagerly adopt it. And at the same time, in using, for instance, the quadrants, I've used them so many times in so many different circumstances, and they've been very effective. Also in explaining stuff to coaching clients or to businesses for whom I'm doing consulting work. So I think for me,
these are not the weak, definitely not the weaker parts of integral. So
no, but also typology. I don't know what you think about that, but that's also something that I've been able to use with great efficacy, and because it reduces the human behavioral spectrum to very manageable generalities, which people can then use to understand themselves and others better and to improve relationships.
Okay. From my psychology years, I remember that typologies are starting with Jung's introvert extrovert has no basis. It is mostly a spectrum, and if you have more than two types, what would their basis be at all, if not metaphysical? Like astrology has types, What is it based on? It's all hanging in the air, of course. And the funny thing is that but that's a side issue, that the sun signs of astrology and the constellations no longer match up. They have shifted in the past 2,000 years. So even the astrologers, there are transpersonalists who are astrologers, so that's why I'm saying it. They have no leg to stand on because they have sun signs and they follow from the book. But if you buy an app and you look at the sky and sky view, for example, if you are born like me, a Virgo, your sun is in Leo. You can check it. So that's a typology that goes out of the window for me, because the claimed basis for it is definitely not fact-based anymore. And this is of course a bit of an outlandish example, but I have not seen. The good thing about Enneagram and so on is that at least you can choose your own type, right? You don't calculate it. You don't say you were born on that date, therefore you are a 6. That would be preposterous. But if you just see 9 types and you say, oh, I feel affinity with the 5 and the 7, fair enough. But that's more like after the fact.
So what do you think about the Big Five model, for instance, which within the field of psychology is regarded as at least the best of the typologies?
Yeah, well, at least that is extracted from data, and probably more fact-based than most typologies. And again, why some person has an emphasis on one type and not on the other is often more a matter of a spectrum, I think. We are all, in a way, introverts, and we are, in other situations, we can be extroverts, and even autistic or whatever. You have highly sensitive. It's all in our repertoire. You only look for dominant features, and then a typology can help, perhaps, but you should never conclude that this is how reality is built or fabricated or something.
No, I think we agree that models are not reality, but approximations of reality, and we need to be cautious of using them in a way that they do represent reality truthfully. But at the same time, I would say that within the typology field, that, of course, as human beings, we can exhibit all behavior of all human beings, potentially, but within our repertoire, we typically tend to exhibit some behaviors more often than others, which puts us within particular categories. And if you say that for instance, the introvert-extrovert is an interesting spectrum, because I totally agree with you, it's a spectrum, and we vary as individuals across the spectrum throughout the day. But at the same time, there has been a lot of research done on brain activity within people who then subjectively identify as introverts and extroverts.
Yeah.
And the correlation is that the brain activity within introverts is typically higher than within extroverts, and that extrovert people tend to seek input. So the brain activity tends to be lower, so they seek external input.
They get energy from that, yeah. And the introvert loses energy, yeah. Precisely. I know all about it.
So for me, these are helpful models. And what's interesting to me also is that Jung basically arrived at the introvert-extrovert spectrum intuitively. As you say, it's basically, let's say, perhaps from a reductionistic perspective, it's guesswork. But on the other hand, when you look at how the Big Five arrived at the category of extroversion, which is basically the spectrum of extroversion and introversion, they arrive at it through, let's say, empiricism, so through a language analysis of descriptive terms in language. And then they sort of bucketed all of the descriptors that they had. And one of those buckets was the extroversion bucket. And 3 of the other buckets also resonate very closely with the other 3 spectrum parts of the MBTI model. So the only thing that isn't present in the MBTI is neuroticism, which is the reverse of emotional stability. But for me, it's a vindication of the fact that intuition can lead to similar outcomes as empiricism. What do you think of that statement?
The famous example of the structure of a molecule that appeared in a dream of some chemist. So even the DNA structure could have intuitively been found. You play with it and you try all the options. And of course, you use intuition in science as well to be creative, or to, you're stuck with something and then you try something else and then suddenly you see it. It's often after a period of being stuck. So you need that building up of the energy, and then suddenly you see it. I have in my work in web design and website support, you have problems and you start looking for things and you can't find it, and an hour later you see it. So that is, in that sense, intuition gives you solutions, but you cannot do without that hour that you have been trying. So the effort needs to be there to boil the water, and so you reach the cooking point or something.
You were speaking earlier about the necessity for instance, the integral community to have some level of openness, so to have some level of engagement with, let's say, the outer world. So how do you see the possibility for engagement between, let's say, the integral life community and the integral world community? What do you see as possibilities there?
I've been thinking about that because both are, of course, publishers. They put out a lot of copy and content on the internet, and it's either integral life authors start writing essays which are posted on Integral World, or but that's unlikely, I would develop trainings or whatever applications and put it on Integral Life, but that won't happen because that's not my expertise. So any reflection or alternative or objection to Integral that merits an essay, I would post immediately on the Integral World, because that has always been the philosophy, that to post as many options as possible, pro and con. For example, now in the war times about Russia and Ukraine, I have an author who is defending Russia, and as problematic I find that, I post it because I know that millions of people will share these views, and it sharpens me to see why it troubles me, and that generated 10 essays from my side, reading through Putin biographies and whatever was needed to find an answer. So I've always had that philosophy to have no restrictions there.
Yes, sir.
I've published like Jeffrey Falk, a Wilbur critic, who is so over the top that I could understand people dismiss him. He's at the same time so funny and sharp that you should not miss out on that, and see what you can learn or pick up. So I don't mind, as long as people write well and have their data in order and their quotations and have an interesting point of view, then I post it.
So would you ever not post something on Integral World?
I doubt it. Yeah. Perhaps something in the field of conspiracy, or like the really nutty elite government, reptilians are behind everything or something. And even then I would still find it colorful. And it's influential. I mean, in the Netherlands, there are people who believe all these things. So, yeah. Actually, I wrote my 2 books on the corona conspiracies, the corona conspiracy, studying these nutty people who deny the existence of viruses. And I didn't even know these people existed, but it's a whole subculture, and they are even so fired up that in the mainstream press you see of course, normal science, and you see the lockdown contrarians, but both believe in viruses. The one group says COVID was a bad virus, and the other says it was not so bad. So all the measures made it actually worse. But then this third group said there's no virus. But they are not part of this discussion. So they are very annoyed, and they see themselves as truth finders and freedom fighters and health freedom and whatever you have. It is totally silly. But I would post an article from these people if they can analyze their position clearly and give their arguments. But they, of course, don't. So I had to listen to all their videos and audios and try to make soup of that, which was fun to do.
So what have you learned from your COVID corona explorations?
Of course, the whole question of where the virus comes from, I still don't know. I know the arguments from both sides, that it came from a lab, or that it comes from nature. It came from nature through the lab, or through an accidental contagion, or a deliberate release. You have all these options. Again, I'm interested in the whole landscape, so I have made schemes of even some people say it came from outer space or whatever. But or it was in frozen food. The Chinese said it came from other countries and so on. And it's annoying that after 2 or 3 years we still don't know, and the chance of finding the answer will only get smaller and smaller because the traces are gone. And I always had the hope that the genome could give us answers, and it's actually a hobby of mine to see if you can find patterns in the genome that are suspicious. And actually the first days after the genome was released, famous virologists were very worried what they saw. And then in a few days, they changed their minds and wrote an article for Nature. And they said it's totally natural and nature origin. This has triggered the conspiracy people to say, see, they really saw that it was suspicious and came from a lab, but money and whatever interests forced them to change their opinion. There's a whole noisy discussion about that. Even then I followed these discussions on Twitter with dozens of people, or also like amateur investigators who know a lot about genomics and bioinformatics. But the smoking gun I haven't found, unfortunately. But I do think viruses are real.
Yes,
I have not fallen from that faith. No. Actually, I've been more fascinated by the tree of life and how it fits in the other kingdoms. By this, viruses are the odd ones out. They are not, non-living organisms. It's very weird.
Very weird, and there's been at least I know of 2 evolutionary theories that explain that, and one is that they sort of regressed from functioning cells to viruses which didn't need any cells because they could hijack cells, and that life actually evolved from viruses to cells. So there's probably also other explanations, but they are indeed a fascinating aspect of reality. And also because if you, for instance, look at the HIV virus, the number of activities that the virus engages in to mislead the human immune system. It looks as if it's made up of all of these, how can we say, strategic choices. It's very interesting.
Yeah, fascinating field. If I could do it all over again, I would go into that bioinformatics, genomics field.
And we were speaking previously about how you were attached to the integral community for about, well, let's say 42 years now, I think, or 41 years. And to which degree do you feel that your development, both personally and professionally, is also as a result of sort of engaging and boxing against the integral model and Wilber himself?
It's hard to tell. I sometimes feel like the same person I was 40 years ago. I've always been like this, like writing and publishing and being curious and being a certified introvert, as I call it. That's never changed. So I even went to India and had a plan of becoming enlightened in 3 years when I was 20. And I came back and I was the same person. And I found meditation fun, and it brought me silence, which I already knew. So that had no added value. And I didn't have the persistence to meditate for 30 years. So I cannot tell if that would have made a difference. But at the same time, I don't regret it at all. It's just the way I am.
Do you feel that what you were seeking and that you didn't find, that perhaps other people have sought and found?
Definitely. At least they have the idea that they found it, and they have experienced things and interpreted things as if they have reached their goals. At the same time, enlightenment is called the last nightmare. So, and you come to the realization that there's nothing to be realized. So you get into all these kinds of paradoxes. I have no patience anymore for that. When I was young, I loved these subtleties and the paradoxes and so on. But yeah, I'm older and sadder and wiser, perhaps, and I'm not triggered anymore with that.
A friend of mine, he studies all sorts of philosophies, and what he reports is that he doesn't sort of find them true or not true, but he basically looks at them as creations of people's minds, and he looks at them as works of beauty, so to speak. Is that also how you perhaps look at the integral model at this stage in your life?
Yeah, for example, the elegance is sometimes used as a criterion for truth, and I don't know if that's valid, but it's definitely the four quadrants, for example, can be very elegant. At the same time, on the integral world, there are dozens of essays that say that this model is too limited. It should be at least hold 6 positions. If you have the pronouns like I, you, and he, and in singular and plural, you get 6. Mark Edwards has done a lot of work in that. So at the same time, it appeals, and in another respect, you think, is it not too limited? And if you reduce it to 3, I, we, and it, all the alarm bells will go off if you are of the opinion that it needs more options than 4. So again, there is a whole landscape of positions thinkable, and it's good to see that the alternatives exist. At the same time, they might be not as snappy and handy as the 4 quadrants. So as a meme, that will probably live on.
And will there ever be a model, a version of the integral model, or any other model of reality with which you could be content?
Yeah, the regular science, like the geology and the 500 million time periods that are charted, and the fossils we find, and I'm totally at home there. I'm happy to be part of the tree of life as a small twig, and even a twig that is aware of the tree of life. What more could you possibly want? Where it came from, I have no clue, and I would be cautious about any explanation. I prefer to say I don't know.
And if you think about the trajectory that you've had in respect to integral theory, where you at first were very enthusiastic and then later became more critical, do you expect a similar trajectory for your relationship with science at this moment?
Well, you could, of course, say you have a dialectic going on, like thesis, antithesis, and that there should be some synthesis in the future or something. Yeah, there's so much to explore. I now have the geopolitics thing, and then I have climate change on my list, and that is again so complex. It's the same thing as with COVID. There are hundreds of thousands of articles, and we still don't know where it comes from. So at the same time, and you have the two polarities of alarmists and denialists. Same for the climate change. I'm triggered by that landscape, as I said, and the psychological reasons for that. So why is somebody alarmist about the climate, and why is somebody denying that the climate has changed all the time, they say? Why? That's a psychological reason, because everybody lives in the same world, but you pick up data that fits your makeup or something.
If you apply the integral model to this conundrum, so to speak, could you perhaps say that then the climate deniers might be correlated with, for instance, traditionalist religion, and that the climate alarmists might be correlated with more, let's say, modernist and progressive outlooks on life?
Yeah, mostly. On the other hand, the alarmists are often accused of having a nature religion. So because there's guilt, and there is like, it's all our fault, and and the earth is will have its revenge on us, and so on. So you can go really primitive and mythical there as well. But on the whole, it is true. The more educated you are, the more you will accept the findings of the climate organizations and so on. And the odd one, climate skeptic. Yeah, you will always have people like that. Like in COVID, you had professors and medical people who were really qualified, I suppose, and they were contrarians, like lockdown contrarians, and they had their own reasons. And it's a very slippery field, of course, for an amateur to decide. You better stick with the mainstream science, I think, in those cases, because we cannot judge.
So where are you now then in sort of judging from your perspective as, let's say, a climate amateur at the moment? Where are you now about judging whether alarmism or denialism is the best way to go?
It's difficult, because you can say better to be on the safe side, but it costs so much money and so much effort, and human beings being what they are so difficult to change. It almost feels like, if you see that graph of this CO2 climbing, it's just an autonomous process, automatic. It's really strange. And the pandemic didn't make a dent in it at all. It doesn't feel like something we have any influence on. But that's how I feel. And we have, of course, Paris agreements, and then every so years we have other climate conferences and so on. It's too little, too late. It's a tanker that we want to change course of, and then we turn to the left and to the right, and then the tanker goes on. I don't know. Probably we will have to adapt. to changes that are coming sooner or later.
Mm-hmm.
And for the Netherlands, that's pretty bad news, because half of the country will be flooded.
Yes, of course, much of the Netherlands is below sea level indeed. So,
Yeah.
and the dike system is not created to withstand the rises in sea level that are expected. So the estimation is, I think, in about 100 years or 75 years, that large parts of the Netherlands will be submerged underwater and therefore uninhabitable. And at the same time, we are indeed, as you say, we are an adaptable species which under crisis conditions can innovate fairly quickly. So what do you see as potential responses of humanity to the climate changing, and which might be the most effective responses?
But we do see all the fires in Southern Europe, and the storms, and the flooding and so on, and we still don't act. I don't know what will be enough reason to change behavior in terms of frequent flying or eating meat or whatever is needed. And then if you know that emerging countries, economies like China and so on, they will burn all the coal that they can find, and you can't blame them for that. But then Integral claims to be able to solve wicked problems. There's a book by that title, Wilbur wrote, with a British author, I forgot his name. And then when I went through that book, I thought, well, the solution is as complicated as the problem. So I'm not sure if that will help.
I'm creating a course about how humanity can relate to the current challenges, for instance, climate change, but also war and inequality, etc., in the most effective way. And it seems to be, as Daniel Schmachtenberger says, who you've seen, maybe heard of, he calls it a meta-crisis, because it appears to be that all of these complex, wicked problems are connected, in a sense that if you try to solve one or part of one, you end up exacerbating aspects of either the same problem or another problem. And as you say, indeed, with the CO2, if we focus all of our efforts on CO2 reduction, then that creates all sorts of economic problems.
It's a dilemma, yeah.
So it appears to be that a whole system's transition or transformation is needed. And interestingly, from my perspective, that hints at the same things that integral theory is pointing to, in the sense of levels of development following upon, let's say, the current three major levels of worldviews, so the traditionalism, modernism, and postmodernism or progressivism. So what do you think about that as being perhaps intuitively derived, but at the same time reflective of our current reality?
Yeah, again, I would just say, if people were more reasonable and took problems seriously, then they would change their behavior. But human psychology as it is, we are not evolved to respond to disasters in the future. We are only responding to immediate disasters. Even when it's too late, that's when we act, and perhaps are very inventive to find last-minute solutions or something. But I'm not too optimistic about the rationality of people.
Because I would say, at least in my network here in the Netherlands, that many people are quite aware of, let's say, because I'm in a bubble, of course, of people whom I know, but many people I know tend to take seriously the state of the planet and do tend to adapt their behavior somewhat within their means. And I would say that's also a rational choice, because if the necessity is not impinging on your situation, then radical change is not the rational response yet, even though a future catastrophe might be looming. And so the question again is the catastrophe so realistic and plausible that radical change is necessary before the conditions are catastrophic? Or is it the case that indeed we need to learn as a species from disaster?
Yeah. And it's even worse that even if we would stop using all the fossil fuels, the system lags behind, so it would still raise the sea levels and the temperature and so on. So that is even makes it even less imaginable for people to see the effects of their behavior. Yeah, in the end, it's all. I mean, fossil fuels are a wonderful discovery, because for most of our humanity history, we didn't have it. And then 3 centuries ago, we stumbled on coal and the energy, free, cheap energy, and the industrialization started, and all the wealth and all the economy is based on that until we've used up everything. And then it's a matter of, do we fall back again? Or can we keep up that level with inventions and electricity and so on? Which I'm not so sure about, because, I mean, it's so cheap and so effective, the fossil fuels. Alternative ways of energy, they don't match that. I don't think so.
Not yet.
So we were very lucky to be born at the height of the party. But the party might be over soon. Of course, peak oil was a topic a while ago, and it is not sure if that is very close. But yeah, a child can see that, yeah, we have millions of tons of barrels a day pumping it out of Arabia or whatever, Venezuela. There are limits to that.
I don't know who said that, but infinite growth on a finite planet is of course is impossible. So anyone who can see that understands that we need to transition to a more, let's say, nature realistic way of living on the planet and with the planet. And that's something that I think integral theory also does invite people to at least consider the fact that if everything is indeed an expression of spirit, or of you don't have to name it, but expression of an underlying unity, then it makes sense to live in harmony with your environment, because from a transpersonal perspective, the whole thing is you. So I think that integral theory is a life, human and earth positive framework, which, when understood correctly, does invite people to live in harmony with their environment and to engage in rational decisions. Would you agree?
Yeah, it could be. Yeah.
Okay. So any remaining things that we haven't touched upon that you'd like to?
No, just an invitation for people to have a look at the Integral World. And there are 2,000 essays, and it's all there. And you can search through it and find anything you find helpful or valuable, or add to it. Invitation is there to write.
So thanks.
I
for
appreciate
the
your invitation and the discussion we had.
Certainly.
Okay, bye-bye.
Be well.